Greetings, adventurer. Welcome to the Ocean County Library's 7th episode of Forge Your Imagination, a guide to immersive world-building podcast, a series that will point creative individuals in the right direction when attempting to create your own world. I'm your host, Tom, a world-building enthusiast and professional dungeon master with over 13 years of experience. In today's episode, I will be discussing how to create a fictional administration. Now, without further ado, let's get this quest on a roll. Now, before I begin, just like last episode, I would like to put a small disclaimer. Please remember, everything I talk about today is fictional. These administrations and organizations are creations with no connection to any real-life groups of people. Secondly, I'd like to remind you that the library is an inclusive and diverse environment for all groups of people. Now, let's get back to the topic at hand. Today will be spent discussing the in-depth creation of administrations. This episode will briefly explain the steps on how to create your administration for your desired world and provide good tricks to employ within this organization. Diving into this head-on, let's start with the most pressing question that we must have answered. The first question I always ask myself is, what kind of ruler does this administration have? I know this is generally a broad question to ask, so let's try to narrow it down a bit further. To be more specific, let's ask ourselves, what title does this ruler hold? Is this an administration run by a monarch or a king who rules its lands, or perhaps it's the opposite? In my world of Akijan, the Orc Empire is led by a matriarch. For those who might not know what that means, a matriarch is a woman who rules or dominates a family, group, or state, much in the same fashion as a queen. I actually use this matriarchal society to build two different, conflicting parties within my Orc Empire. Normally, the first child of the matriarch would have become the next ruler of the nation. However, since for the first time since their founding, this child was born as a boy, most citizens and other nobles rejected this child's claim to the throne. So, of course, the next following years, most people only focused on the next few children born, who were all women. Now, they had to compete for the throne, but while they were doing this, another faction was rising in secret. This faction had named itself the Sword of the King, which showed their loyalty to the son who had been the firstborn and, in their eyes, the rightful ruler. From there on, you could delve into disagreements, family ties, conflicts, resolutions, and trauma that could have resulted from that lifestyle. I personally chose this method because it adds a good flair of realism and allows my audience to pick a side, or alternatively, maybe they decide that neither side should be fit to rule. After all, you could always shift away from a single person deciding everything and elect a presidential figure. This would allow you to create special events or elections and make more use out of councils and senates. Now, continuing step 1, after finding out what the title of the ruler is and what it means to its people, is to figure out who that leader is and what they will become. What I mean by this is, just because someone is born and raised to be good doesn't mean that they will be. After all, trauma and betrayal can create scars that won't heal. So, someone who started off as a good person and was raised for greatness won't always reach their full potential. For example, this firstborn son was most likely raised to be a kind and good king, but if they were betrayed by one of his sisters, then I'm sure he would have trust issues that are hard to overcome. Those trust issues can lead him to doubt the motives of genuine allies, or isolate him in the long run. Remember, situations like this could always make or break a leader, and that is something I want all of you adventurers to keep in mind when creating your nation's ruler, or multiple rulers, if that's what you decide. Up next, I would consider the laws your nation will uphold. It's always good to have general thoughts on what laws will work best in your world. If you were in a world with both magic and mortals, hiding the fact that magic exists, you would most likely have some of the following rules. Probably something around the lines of no mystical familiars can be summoned in the lands of mortals. They most likely would only want you to summon familiars that would be considered normal, quote unquote, in the world of mortals. So this would be something that doesn't catch the general population's eye. This would be something if you had a familiar that was like a dog, like a golden retriever. Whereas if you tried to summon a mystical creature, like a phoenix familiar, that would most likely be seen as blasphemy and an open breach of the rules that have been set. Another good rule would be magic would be restricted in the lands of mortal. For example, in my universe of Solera, spells are only allowed to be cast if the witch or warlock has been sent by the church, military, or noble house. You likely can only cast discreet spells when sent by someone in a position of power, especially for specific quests or missions. You wouldn't be able to use your wand freely. So you wouldn't be able to cast really flashy looking spells, general things like that. You wouldn't want to look odd or eye-catching to a mortal. However, not being able to use magic at all would make it completely almost impossible to capture rogue magical creatures, if that was your mission, per se. So, in times like this, they would probably allow mages to cast spells through their familiars as a temporary conduit for magic. Alternatively, if they were sent to heal an important mortal with magic, and that place for some reason didn't allow animals inside of the building, like some hospitals or something, then it would be smart to have the mage exchange their wand for a cane. A cane would make the magic and mage in question look a lot less conspicuous. However, regardless of how the spells are cast, the witch or warlock in question would have to avoid being seen by mortal eyes. So, if they were somehow actually seen when they weren't supposed to be, this is when, in my universe, that the Erasal Task Force, run by the Overseers Inquisitors, would come in to erase the mortal's memories. Another rule would be that magic items cannot be obtained by non-magical individuals. You're not allowed to leave, give, sell, or gift anything that is naturally magical or from the magical world to a mortal. This is seen as a huge liability and can damage the relationship between mages and mortals. If this is somehow broken, once again, the Erasal Task Force would be sent to wipe the memories of the mortal and reclaim the magical item. The Erasal Task Force in my universe is seen as critical, but no one but those in power know if this job is just a myth or if it's an actual existing profession. Adventurer, let's use our disengage action to take a step back and reflect on what the Ocean County Library has to offer. The Ocean County Library offers adult writers groups for creative writing at multiple branches like the Brick, Jackson, Manchester, Point Pleasant Borough, and Waretown libraries. If this is something you're interested in, adventure, please keep an eye out for a group near you. More information on exact dates can be found on our website, theoceancountylibrary.org, under the calendar of events. Or, if you're feeling extra adventurous, feel free to inquire about making your own writers group as the leader at any branch without an existing writers group. This is something available at all Ocean County Library branches except for the Bayhead Express and the Whiting Reading Center. Now, adventurers, grab your anvil and hammer because it's time to return to forging your imagination. Picking up where we last left off, try to keep in mind that the rules for administrations can differ, and there are often multiple sets of rules that need to be followed. For example, the 3 rules I've spoken about previously are all rules that have been sent by the ruler of this nation. However, if the characters or character in question were also students, then they would most likely to have to follow whatever school rules there were as well. For example, the rules in the school of Solera, one of 6 magical schools around the globe, consist of the following basic rules that a student would have to follow. Rule number 1. New spells will be practiced under teacher supervision. Number 2. Do not wander past the warded fences. They're there to protect students. Number 3. Do not try to socialize with the Wendigos. They are dangerous and hungry. Rule number 4. All disagreements will be resolved through duels. Rule number 5. Flying after 10 p.m. is forbidden due to worm dragon migration patterns. And the last and final rule, familiars are for defense only. However, if the character was an adult who had graduated, then they would only have to listen to the default rules set by their nation's administration. Although, in a low fantasy genre where the magical world is hidden from mortal eyes, I would encourage you to set more rules that will help keep the audience from poking holes in your world's logics and rules. A good example of logic notwithstanding criticism would be if you wanted to make a challenging scene where a character's family member was in danger and needed their help. You, as the storyteller, wanted this character to take some type of mortal form of transport, which is obviously much slower than magic, to add suspense. However, it would be difficult to add this to the story if the character in question had a dragon familiar. In that scenario, if they wanted to escape from this crowded mortal city, then what's stopping them from just finding the highest building away from mortal eyes, and then summoning their dragon familiar to fly away? This would be a scenario in which the audience can see clear flaws in your planning, but if there were restrictions set in place for flying forms of travel, then they would once again be stuck and unable to summon their familiar and fly away. To streamline this logic behind my world of Solera, I created accepted forms of travel according to the laws set in place by the magistrate. These forms of travel are heavily restricted and regulated by a corporation known as MOVE, which is short for Magical Official Voyage Insurance. And, obviously insurance is spelled with an E, not an I. It is unnecessary to register land animals or vehicles due to lack of risk. However, to provide an avian, which is air, or aquan, which is water, form of travel to either yourself or to another person, to a magical vehicle or creature, you need to have an ATP, otherwise known as an arcane travel permit. To qualify for this permit, you need to be at least 16 years old, and this permit expires every 3 years. You also must be screened for magical color. People with black magic are unable to travel and have to report to the magistrate to find better forms of travels for criminals, because black magic is unnatural and only is the result of corruption and decay. You also need to acquire a valid registration with the Office of Arcane Excursion. A worker from this office will come and inspect the magical beast or vehicle that will transport the mages or goods. If the magical creature or vehicle is deemed safe and orderly, they will issue you your registration that'll last for 3 years. And to renew this registration, it costs 3 Electrum Drachma. Now, the next step in creating an administration is to delve into the land of politics. You could always have 2 parties with conflicting views to add drama and conflict in your universe, or you could make it so that there's only one belief system with no easily found flaws. In this scenario, you can make it so that it's more of a mystery, to find out what's going on in the government and find out what they're possibly hiding. A great example of this would be in the show Avatar: The Last Airbender, in the great city of Ba Sing Se. It makes it seem like it's the perfect city, and no one says anything poor about it. However, you find out that's because they use hypnosis under Lake Laogai to make the city appear perfect. Ultimately, it's up to you, the creator, to decide what's best. I would like you to please keep in mind, however, that all of these titles mentioned in today's episode are available to borrow at the Ocean County Library. The following step is a bit trickier, and it covers concerns of citizenship. This is something that could be a world-building element that shows how new species join a council of aliens that have evolved far beyond the human race. It could be as easy as taking a picture or as futuristic as taking a whole scan of the person, or maybe as advanced as needing to study and take tests. It also helps when attempting to create councils. See, in a lot of good stories, storytellers create a council of most powerful individuals. This is a good option for a magical world to separate the council members based on their specialties and types of magic. The number of council seats would depend probably on the variety of different magicals you have created. For example, in my universe, the world that I created had miracles, which are seen as passive combat spells, combat magic, which is obviously combative spells geared towards fighting and defending yourself from harm, white magic, which is geared towards healing magic and helping people with mental health, then lastly, familiars experts, which is someone who's very knowledgeable in familiars and an expert at catching them. That would fill 4 seats in the council, but I don't like 4 seats because when deciding to pass something, a bill or something in a council, it's always better to have an odd number of people. Therefore, the 2 sides won't have even numbers of votes. So I went one step further and I included a monarch, which is the most powerful and influential mage of the time. That way there would be a total of 5 seats on the council. The last step off the top of my head to mention would be creating military or police rankings. In my magical universe, I actually have 3 sections of different police groups that uphold and protect the laws. So section 1 is handled by the prothesis, which is protector in Greek. They enforce the general rules, much like the police. So they would handle witches and warlocks who attempt to break the law. Section 2 is handled by the epivolis, which is enforcer in Greek. They're a group of specialized wizards who hunt down and capture rogue mages. This is an elite task force put together with direwolf mounts. Section 3 is handled by the kaignos, which is hunter in Greek. They're a group of specialized hunters that capture rogue monsters. Please keep in mind that I really might have butchered how to say those words, and don't quote me on it because I did my best with Google Translate. But that's all I have today, adventurers. I hope you enjoyed this episode and tune back in with me next month when you dive into how to create general lore for your world.
If you are hearing this message, you've officially listened to the entire episode, and for that, I'd like to thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please take a look over some of our other OCL Soundwaves podcasts. Feel free to leave us a rating on Spotify, Radio Public, and Pocket Casts. Most importantly, safe travels, adventurers.